everybody. This is T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, we're going to continue our discussion about negativity and positivity and neutrality and weigh out the good parts of it, the not so good parts of it, and how it actually fits into the kind of work that we're doing and the kind of lives that we're living. Before we jump into that, though, Boris sent over a little draft of a article, blog post, something or another he's putting together. So I'm going to hand it over to Boris for a second and let Boris set the stage for us.
Well, I think our prior conversation centered around this dynamic of this great resignation that's going on. And I've been thinking about, this is all about results and execution. Companies are struggling with how to get more with less from people. Individuals are feeling disengaged. That's clearly what the statistics show. And so for me, it was kind of a study in how do we identify what is the best way to enable individuals to be their best self each and every day when they show up at work and be fully excited about the organizational goals and trying to deliver real results. And I'm finding that the difficulty in execution comes down to not a skills-based approach, which I think a lot of organizations are focused on doing assessments around, can this person do certain functions? They even, in the hiring process, spend a lot of time assessing, her historical performance that they've had at other jobs, as if that's an indication of what they're going to do here. To me, I don't believe in this past performance is or a great indicator necessarily. Right. But skills are skills. And I'm more interested is, will they actually do what they're claiming they're going to do in their role on a day-to-day basis? And that usually you don't find out till after the fact. And I believe that, productive tension management, it could be very vitally important in trying to help individuals and coach them to being their best self in the execution portion.
Excellent. Now, I did chat over to everybody the draft of the article. I hope that's okay, Boris. It might be easier for people to read it locally. Now, the first paragraph is just setting the stage, but I thought it was really interesting when the second paragraph starts getting into the topic of execution. And ultimately, that's part of the engagement rings that we look at. And this is what I want to throw out there to get the dialogue going. And I'd be very interested to know how all of you would weigh in on this. I think one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make is holding the assumption that engagement is a personality trait. That the person is engaged, as opposed to the person happens to be engaged in this particular activity at this particular moment in time. But engagement ebbs and flows. There are times when you could be deeply engaged in a given activity, and other times when that exact same activity would not be something that you would find yourself engaged in. And there are countless examples of this that happen all day, every day. So I'll give you this as an example. House cleaning. Now, if I say to you guys, how many of you are fully engaged in the act of keeping your house clean all the time? Anybody a neat freak who just always wants the house to be absolutely camera ready all the time? Fess up if it's you. I see no one dashing to the microphone, but
well, I'm kind of that.
I'm kind of there. I'm not
kind of. See, I'm hearing kind of. Yeah. So
you said neat freak. I'm not a neat freak, but I like everything to be clean and presentable.
Exactly. All right. And so we all have our own little baseline, if you will, when it comes to the level of engagement we have around keeping the house clean. Now, let me add an element to it. Next week is Thanksgiving and everybody's coming to your house. Did that in any way change your level of engagement around the task? What do you guys think? Do you get more engaged in doing a task when you know you're going to have company?
Well, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. And so this is what I'm trying to illustrate is that just because I appear to be engaged in a given activity under one set of circumstances in no way guarantees that I'm going to be engaged in the same activity under a different set of circumstances. So if it's just you, and oh, by the way, the government has pretty much told us to all stay home for 18 months, how many of you had a little bit of the house cleaning duties slip a little bit, and then suddenly go like, oh my gosh, someone might be coming over now that things are changing a little bit. I guess I really should, whatever the case may be. So I want to put out there just to emphasize what Boris was saying, and that's this idea that to go out there and try to hire someone based on some attribute of engagement is just, folly. It's simply not going to mean much of anything, if you will. Thoughts about that, comments about that before I add another layer of
Well, for me, I think it speaks to something about that organizations tend to forget about the environment itself, right?
Very good, very good.
The external environment sets the conditions by which one are looking at things, their perception plays out. And that's what the body is going to pick up on.
That's right.
The body is going to pick up on that. So again, when we're talking about emotions, that happens at a mechanistic level. It starts at when the body's just responding to something that's picking on in the environment. So in other words, the brain is always playing catch up to where the body's already been.
Very good.
T, another response to your example would be people that got totally motivated and engaged when the pandemic came because they went, oh, I'm going to be home for a couple months, as we thought in the beginning. I better clean every closet and drawer and take
let's do all those things. Yeah, right. Yep. And so, but then as the pandemic continued and the lockdowns kind of continued, the desire to maintain that or take on other projects. You guys remember a meme that came out a few months after COVID all happened that said, and now we've all learned that we do X if we only had the time was never the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So I think that's part of it. Now, going back to Brian's idea about a lot of engagement having to be impacted by the environment, Tim, I want you to share with everyone what you shared with me just before we started the call about engagement and Gallup.
Oh, yeah, sure. So for the last decade or so, Gallup has been tracking employee engagement. And their finding is saying that upwards to 2/3 of the workforce are disengaged. And so when we were having the conversation about negativity, that came to mind for me, and we were at the top of the hour, so I did not jump in to make that point. But we tend to see that, and I think it's a natural inclination too. And even, and T, I've heard you mention a number of times that the natural trend is to go down grid.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's interesting with this topic is just this week, I had someone send me a message saying that they were burnt out in their job. And so I think part of what's missing in this conversation that Boris is presenting to us is that trending. And so whatever excited her about that job in the beginning, perhaps has run its course. And she now needs to begin to think about either what was that thing that excited her about that work and try and reconnect to that, or begin to look for something different. And so I think when we start talking about patterns and trending, I think that it lends to this conversation.
Excellent.
Tim, I love what you're saying. I just want to chime in on this. I think this is why my belief that OKRs can be helpful in this manner, because you can't measure something unless you have a benchmark to put it up against. Whatever intrinsic motivators, the qualitative motivators that individual might have had, they're either coming from a point of inspiration or desperation, in my view, when they come to doing tasks. And hopefully they're coming from a very strong point of motivation. But in many cases, if that motivation is gone, you're not likely to re-engage that person unless you have a clear idea of how they personally align with the organization's goals. And usually those organizational goals they don't mesh really well at the task level for the individual. So if you have OKRs as a framework, you can articulate directly to that individual, this is organizationally what we're trying to deliver in the group that you're involved with and working day to day. How does that impact you? Where do you see your contribution? And then what's your personal motivators? And even if the personal motivators are something like, I need more time off so I can go fishing on the weekends and unwind, whatever that might be.
Well, let me chime in two things real quick. First, Boris, I'd like you to define what OKR is for everybody. A lot of people who listen to recordings may not be familiar with that. But the other thing is that what you've just finished with is questions for reflection. My question for you is, who in the organization should be asking those questions of the individuals? So go ahead, what's an OKR and who should be asking questions?
So OKR stands for objectives and key results. And it's a way or a framework where an organization can align their activities at various levels. And many companies like Google and others, this all came out of Andy Grove and Intel fame when he was the CEO there. And it's very well depicted in an older book that's out there, Only the Paranoid Survive, which is where I learned it from. But what it does is it provides a framework for communicating and coordinating action around the things that matter most in an organization. And so if you've got appropriate OKRs and they're broken down to the activities of that individual, his or her role on a team, then you have, in my view, a benchmark with which to manage that engagement. Now, to answer your question around who the appropriate person is, whenever you're implementing OKRs, you typically have a leader, a manager, whatever you want to call that person, that's involved on a one-to-one basis, kind of as a coach with that individual. And most of the time, they're having these one-to-one conversations on a periodic basis. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. And those conversations don't just stem around the strategic objectives and the things that they're challenged with at work. A lot of times those conversations about their personal motivators and what are the things outside of work that are important to them. And they build really great connections with the leader. It becomes their mentor and coach in the organization. And the other part of the equation, there's a flip side of the equation when it comes to OKRs, and that is when you embed OKRs in an organization, you can't forget the other side, which is conversations, feedback, and recognition. The purpose of those one-on-one interactions is to facilitate those conversations, to give the individual feedback and give them recognition, not just in a public manner, but in a one-to-one basis. And that is, I think, when implemented correctly, is a great way to create this engagement we're looking for, build that connection with the individual, and hopefully understand what their intrinsic motivators are for showing up as their best self every day.
And see, when I wanted to add to what Boris just described, because I was introduced to OKRs through my executive MBA program when I was in it, and the missing element that organizations tend to miss in terms of implementing it is the task is seen through a different lens than the role for the employee, right? The employee will see themselves through the role because that's them applying themselves to that. The task is often presented and seen through the corporation. So one of the things we were looking at was the disconnect between cultural fit, task fit, and role fit. And they're all different behavioral lens. And so without appropriate OKRs, which is where I think tension management can help, there's no alignment. And those are often lived out in this chasm. There's like a strategic gap between them or some kind of firewall. And so that's why you have these 2/3 of American workforce, I think in particular, are disengaged.
And I think to bring up the point that Tim was making earlier, that if you have appropriate OKRs, you've now created that benchmark with which you can gauge over time the level of engagement and how this individual is engaging around the business activities and help make an impact on that. And then you bring in tension management as the methodology to institute it, to make those changes.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation because I spent a lot of time working that alignment issue in organizations, and you know, what everyone's saying makes a lot of sense. And Boris, I really appreciate your bringing that up. One of the things that I brought it down to, have brought it down to in different circumstances, is that notion of balancing task and relationship. And people need to be emotionally connected, not only with the task at hand, the role, and the role has to be, as you're saying, Brian, really clearly and carefully defined in connection with the strategy and the goals of the organization. But there needs to be, you know, and this is the role of the leader, you know, and what Chi has been talking about, you know, the prideful leadership, and creating that and allowing that emotional connection at all of those levels, because that's what engagement, where engagement kicks in. It's not just the ability to do a job or the ability to fit into a role, in which case you can go down grid very, very quickly once you've mastered it. But it's that emotional engagement that keeps you rolling and seeking and wanting to improve and innovating, and that is a leadership task, as far as I'm concerned, is to keep that emotional, that vision going with that emotional engagement.
Excellent, excellent. Ellen, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, Boris and I have had this conversation about the front end of this. And I think there is, so Brian had that thing about the value creation economy. And so I think there's a couple of front end components of that. And the way I've been thinking about value creation is, first of all, at the individual level. So what are the aptitudes, skills, abilities, and so forth you have if you want to use them, but what are these? And there are a variety of assessments to get at those, including at a granular level. What are your hardwired natural talents? What comes easy and hard for you? So you know the kind of value that you can add. Then I put with this the axiogenics frame, which is, are you able and devoted to value creation in your environment? Or do you have cognitive biases, thinking habits that come up in certain circumstances in which it's really more about you? And more about you can be, I don't like to engage conflict, that's scary. Or I need everybody to hear my opinion, and I'm really dedicated towards that. Or I've got a better idea and I want to keep improving something. And so when people are attuned with what are their cognitive biases, but flip into their cognitive strengths, now they're in value creation mode. And the notion behind this is what call the central question. What choice can I make and what action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? And so if you have a company that is in which people, you know, are brought into this as part of their onboarding, where that is the whole notion is that we're involved in value creation, then that becomes a really, really, and then leadership continues to message that so that that becomes how the organization thinks. That shifts sometimes why people are involved or what from the personal standpoint can create disengagement. Then the third layer that I put onto this is, are you solving as an organization the right problems? So, and that brings out the Bassiter methodology that starts out with, well, what do we think the problem is? And going through the methodology to find out, well, how do we really define the problem? And are we working on the right things? Because sometimes you can be really good at executing something that doesn't matter. and doesn't really move the needle forward. So I sort of see these in a continuum, moving then into the OKRs and the tension management and so forth. So that's kind of something I'm working on when I think about creating, really entering into this value creation notion. What is my personal ability and dedication? Then how do I do this in a group to solve problems and part of that? And then how do we take it forward? So that's just what I've been noodling on.
Excellent, excellent.
Hey, may I ask a
Great,
quick
Alan.
question?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Go right ahead, Brian.
When you were talking with Diane on your excursion, did you guys talk about, or did you talk to her about PowerPoint maneuvers or that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I think that's what this is to me, because, I was just thinking about all we've been talking about thus far and bringing it forward to this idea of executing on a daily basis. And what seems to be happening a lot of times when the emotions are involved is no one is really taught how to experience that. And so they try to suppress the emotion. You hear this a lot in stress, and say stress, 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 avoid stress. The idea isn't to avoid stress. The idea is to understand it and to experience what you need to experience and then decide what you need to move, because cortisol is released in the adrenal glands and it's throughout the body, and it's released at different levels for different reasons. So we're not meant to avoid these kinds of things. Those are signals. Those things are meant for you to experience them, and then you take that signal. But when Diane talks about the what we now understand as the Diane-Buffalin maneuver, that toggling between the limbic and the cognition, that's exactly what tension management can account for, because it accounts for 3 different systems that all speak differently, right?
Yep.
The emotional, those are different processes.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I think, Brian, in axiogenics, that's part of the work of active mindfulness.
Right.
You get into an experience and all of a sudden you feel that cortisol, or you feel that impulse to do something that begins to feel like, all right, so and then you get a hold of what is the thought process and is this going to really move things forward? And is this more about me in some form, or is this really, what's going to add the greatest value to this interaction? And so it's that ongoing process of active mindfulness to catch yourself.
So to take this back to Boris's article, Boris, are we messing up your article significantly?
No, this is great.
All right, because here's the thing that I want to throw in there, and it's going to build on what Kathy said, what Ellen said, what Brian's been sharing, and that is that this idea that somehow or another we can go out there and hire and select people who are engaged or who are naturally motivated. If you look at the change grid, engagement is a very small section. Engagement and execution isn't even a full quadrant of the system. These are not commonly found people who are able to keep themselves self-motivated, able to keep themselves fully engaged. No, we have a lot more people who will come to an organization and greatly announce their intention to be engaged and to do whatever and to support the corporation's mission and on and on. And intention is a really big slice of the puzzle. So I'm saying this just to say that the burden of keeping employees motivated and keeping employees engaged cannot be placed on the shoulders of the employee. So particularly as we start talking about negativity, we can't be in a limbic mode and a cognitive mode at the same time. We're going to be pulled into one or into the other. I mean, maybe there's some in between, but that doesn't seem to be really all that common. So how can I expect someone who is unmotivated, disengaged, feeling very negative, to go in there and make themselves be more motivated and more engaged and more positive? I don't think that is even in the realm of realistic expectations for how humans are going to behave. Now, what that means by getting this whole thing and getting now to your article is that I would like to say that who we should be very picky about when it comes to hiring or promoting more often than not are how we go about promoting people into the management ranks and the executive ranks. If they do not have the natural abilities to motivate others, to keep people engaged, and as Kathy pointed out, the things that are all part of pride-based leadership, then they have no business stepping into the role of management or leader. And so I think when we talk about people right now, the great resignation and all these people just deciding enough is enough, I think this is kind of a, what do you call it? This is where basically how American organizations are being run is being put to the test, and they are failing miserably. So because leadership is not something we encounter very much, so I could babble about this for hours and often do, but I would say to you, I think that one thing you really want to be heavily emphasizing in your article is that this is a reflection on management and leadership's either ability or, as you pointed out, willingness to do this part of the job. So thoughts about that, anyone?
Well, I'll just say that I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think the problem that we have is we promote people into positions without providing them any training. So the example I'll give is we take the best salesperson and turn him into a manager.
Of course. Yep. Because every sales representative is exceptional at keeping good records.
Yeah, they're a model for us. We want more of these top salespeople. So let's just use them in the way that they're not built. We'll promote them into a manager which they're highly inadequate in doing and don't have a skill set around.
And even that decision to promote that person was made by some other manager or leader who obviously does not know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what we're really watching is a lot of workers just going like, I came to this business and I was engaged. I had strong intention. I was motivated. And somehow or another, the organization, whether it's culture or whether it's individuals inside of it, have just depleted that to a point that I don't even want to be around anymore. Or I'll fly low enough under the radar that I keep getting my paycheck, but nobody bothers me.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just mention that, not to go back and dwell on this OKR idea, but OKRs is the framework where the individual can have that relationship that they're building with their leader, their mentor, whatever you want to call it. And it's where you can build what I call a shared purpose between what the organization is trying to accomplish and what they are individually trying to do with their career.
Right. But the challenge there is that it is dependent on the fact that there is a leader who understands OKRs, who embraces it, and is willing to do their part of the work. It can't be employee driven.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so how often do we encounter these really good quality leaders? Are we all in agreement that they're the exception, not the rule?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, T, and I tend to go to the sort of the global thinking around this, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. But the comment that I wanted to make about what I'm hearing is that COVID did an interesting thing in that it kind of stepped in and revealed, as we've been talking about, all the cracks in the system, whether it's the organizational system, whether it's the supply chain, the socioeconomic system, the quality inequality, our societies, all of those things. And so to me, the Great Resignation is just an example of people looking at and seeing all of those cracks and saying, where do I fit? Where do I belong? The old world just doesn't feel right anymore.
Right. Particularly since it's pretty easy for someone who wants a job these days to go and find one.
Exactly. Yeah, those people are resigning and they're going to other places, but many are probably going to private gigs or they're,
Right,
whatever.
right.
It's not that they're sitting around and independently wealthy.
No, of course not.
Looking for other things. And I
Yeah,
think
Ellen, go ahead. Your hand's up. Go ahead. You don't need to raise your hand. Just chime in.
Okay. Yeah, I think another thing that's going on with this in the reflection is back to, is this how I want to spend my life doing this? I've met two people in the last couple months, one in a hospital, and it was a nurse. And I thought, he's a very mature nurse and very self-possessed and so forth. I come to find out that, because I was starting to question him, he'd been a nurse for a year, but he had formerly been in an engineering company for 30 years.
Oh.
And he just decided, I want to do something that is more meaningful or whatever. And so it was a great transition for him. Other colleague of mine has a wife who was very successful in the corporate world and all of that. She's now in a advanced nursing school program because it was serving something that was really important. The other things I've read about this is that some people are starting to realize, am I doing something that fits into the future of work? And that there are, at one study was that 63% of people are willing to retrain to get into another line of work, either because it pays more, it's more for the future, or it feels like it matches up with something that has not been satisfied inside of them for a long time. So that's also an element, I think, that's going on is, apart from the leadership, is a real exploration of, do I like the work? And does it make my heart sing? And one of the things I think that can, that if more organizations were giving people testing that led to onboarding, like, let's really get to know you and your complement of skills and abilities and so forth, and what are the possibilities for you within this organization before you just get pigeonholed in a role.
Right.
And I think that that's the other thing is that people, and this comes back to the management thing that we're all talking about, is that people are looking for this sense of real meaning in what they're doing. And is it something that I just really love doing? And is there a career path for me, particularly the people who are remote? There's the whole question for them of, do I have the same promotional opportunities as the people who are on site? And how do I maintain that stickiness and the sense that they're really also thinking about me, which is also part of the management tab. But this is some of the
So
stuff.
this resonates, what you've just said, Ellen, resonates with two things we've talked about in the Circle of Brilliance before. The first one is that I'm hearing and seeing a lot of evidence that we as a species, perhaps, as a civilization, perhaps, are moving up that spiral dynamic more quickly. And if we really study the spiral dynamic movement, oftentimes it is some sort of a cataclysmic event that triggers the next trip up the spiral. So this idea about people wanting to be more engaged in things that are more meaningful, wanting to value things again, like family and connections with friends, and living that kind of a life where instead of living to work, we're working to live. This is all part of what, I don't remember if it's yellow or orange. Do you guys remember? Are we orange now and going up to yellow?
We're orange, moving toward teal. Toward
teal, yeah. And so I think that's going on. And then the other thing was, I seem to remember it started with an I, but it was said that it's basically a way to coach people to find what they really want most in their life. And it said you have to find something that you are good at, that people will pay you to do. I'm scrolling backwards because I'm sure the diagram is up there somewhere. We even tried to overlay it on the change grid. And I remember it was some kind of a Japanese model or
Ikigai,
who, what, where?
Ikigai.
Ikigai, that was it, Ikigai. So that resonates very much with what Ellen was just sharing. I know we've got that diagram back here in the pile somewhere. It's amazing the stuff we've talked about over these past 2 years, everybody. That's why I keep building out here it is. What the world needs, what you love, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for.
Yeah.
And try to find that where they all cross, which ends up being at the center of the change grid.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
I
interesting.
think that does speak to where many people are now. It's like, how can I be paid? How can I be appreciated for who I am, what my dreams are, and how I can contribute?
That's right.
So when this, because I remember when I first read what Boris wrote, and I seen that idea of the will.
Yes.
That challenges is that these perceptions are challenging the conception of work in general.
Mm-hmm.
And see, as an immigrant coming here, like when I was talking to a group recently, and they were talking about the work they do, how they do it. No one spoke about why they do what they do. But everyone had this idea about being dissatisfied and how they're not going to do it for a long time and how there's no satisfaction in what they're doing. And so hearing my story that, I have the great fortune to do and just apply myself to whatever project or whatever worthwhile thing I want to do, they say, well, how do you build a career? I said, well, my career has always, that's it. It's just been a portfolio career, but I'm doing things that I enjoy doing. So it seems like my conception of work has always built around this idea of how can I best contribute to something.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
most people that I've met, their idea of work is about, it's the first thing they ask, well, what do you do? And so they're doing whatever it is they do for 20, 30 years, but you're dissatisfied. And there's no, as Kathy would say, there's no embodiment in it. Their body is getting sicker, but they're continuing to do this work. And you're stressed out, you're burnt out. That just never made sense to me on a basic level.
Yep. Yeah.
If I can just comment here, Brian, I mean, I think this is part of what we're saying about, role disconnect. People want to contribute. They really do want to contribute. That's a healthy thing for a human being to do. And what many organizations have done, and that's why I'm in the field of org design, how do you create organizations that don't just pigeonhole, don't just create these roles that people have to kind of squish into and force and make work for them, but how can you then create goals and focus that says, what is my contribution and how can I be free to contribute?
Mm-hmm.
And while that sounds very idealistic, there are organizations out there that do that well. And I think those are the organizations of the future, and why so many of these other places are breaking down right now, because they're not allowing that contribution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that come from any of the dogma or industrial revolution, that it just fall into this kind of trap of thinking that this is the way to manage people, this is the way to build organizations? Is that where it's from?
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is old model, old industrial model, and we're moving beyond the the information age out into that new paradigm. So that we're still operating in an old industrial model, and that's what people are finally saying. What COVID allowed them to do was say, wow, I don't need to do it that way anymore. I can.
In fact, Kathy, you seem to remember the colors better than I do, but I think one of the characteristics of the orange, is it a loop spiral, was that we have these established ways of doing things. Maybe it comes from the red, but the traditional way of running a business, the hierarchy, the old boy network, all that sort of stuff comes from an evolution that's probably already 2 generations old.
Oh, it's been gone, and some organizations and countries are hanging on to it. Orange is where
Yep.
most people are because they've added on information, structures, technology, and so that's at the top of the orange. But what we're moving more toward is human-centered focus.
Right. And that moves us up the next one. And
Yeah,
movement up the spiral accelerates with each new trip around it. And part of the reason why it accelerates is because of how readily available information is. So you go all the way back to the base of the spiral, and nobody could talk to anybody who was further than, I don't know, a mile away from them, because, you didn't walk that far just for the fun of it or whatever. Well, now, of course, we can have a message transmitted globally in a matter of milliseconds. And so that's also impacting it. But movement up the spiral historically has been quite slow and plodding. But there's been a few events that have happened that have accelerated the movement. And the thought is that COVID is one of the most pattern interruptive events in any of our lifetimes.
Yeah, this
So,
is fascinating because Peter Drucker, which is one of my favorite management gurus to read, but I remember he wrote in 1999, the Managing Oneself. That was part of his management challenges for the 21st century. And one of the things he had said in that piece that he wrote that the Harvard Business Review covers all the time, he said, when the history of our time is written in a few hundred years, the most precedent thing is not going to be medical science or all this technology we have out. He said it's going to be the unprecedented change in the human condition.
Very good.
That was back in 1999.
Well, people have seen it coming, they really have, but they just haven't known we didn't have that cataclysmic event like COVID to make it happen. There were too many gradual things. And, COVID is a blessing in disguise in that way, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, and I was listening to one commentary about the supply chain issues right now. And someone was talking about that there is actually another benefit that has come out of that. And that is that people are now being far more selective about where they decide to spend their money. And they're realizing that all these things that they thought they absolutely had to have were in fact not really things they really had to have. That's not to suggest there aren't plenty of things that are a problem. Like, for example, the cruise line I was on was Celebrity, and Celebrity and a couple of other cruise lines had to cancel a whole slew of cruises in just the past couple of weeks because the ships that they have out at sea cannot go through the Panama Canal because of the backlog. So their ships are stuck on another, in another ocean. And so the supply chain issues are very, very real. But one of the positives that's coming out of it are people are reevaluating what it is they really need or to spend money on, and et cetera. So I thought that's also about the spiral up, because spiral up is about returning to a simpler way of living.
Yes, that's right. They can't fill their lives up with things that distract them.
Right.
Because what we do, especially in this country, what we do, so that we actually have to really reflect and think about how we spend our lives versus what we fill it up with. And
yeah, in fact, this commentary that I had heard was talking about grocery stores, because the shelves that tend to be vacant right now, or where there's shortages, tend to be in the interior of the store. And what the commentator said was that how many people realize that everything you can buy in the center of the store, you can make yourself from the things that are around the outer edges of the store. So it's vegetables, we can get meat, we can get dairy, we can get basic things like flour or whatever, because this tends to be made inside the United States. So all those pre-made products, all those packaged things that you see in the interior of the store, like all the cans of soup where there's empty shelves and all this, people, they're kind of going like, you can make your own soup. Or there's bread short. You know, you can make your own bread. So people are also kind of returning to cooking better for themselves and their families. So I just thought it was very interesting for someone to find the silver lining in whatever the inconveniences are that we're all dealing with.
I think also from a business standpoint, we haven't really seen the full impact of what COVID is bringing to the table.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at the speed of change that businesses have been struggling with for the last, I would say, 3-4 decades, right? We used to have industries that would change over a 75-year life cycle, and then it became 35-year life cycle. Now the average company needs to reinvent themselves every 3 to 4 years at a minimum. And that speed of change is, for many organizations, just unreasonable. They're not equipped for that to happen.
Right.
And now COVID hits and they have to change on a dime.
Right, with fewer people and fewer resources than they had before.
I think this is still to be told, the story of what's going to happen when we come out the other end of this, because I believe we're in the eye of the storm still. When we come out the other end, how many companies are actually going to be able to survive the speed of change and what's going to hit them? I think it's going to be a lot less than we anticipate.
I agree, Boris, and I think that speaks to that whole notion of, because I've done a lot of strategic planning in my life for organizations. It's like, what is strategic planning now? What is strategy? What does it mean? What kind of timeline are you looking at? And then how do you manage that notion of goals and alignment? Because the time frames have gotten so much shorter that that whole concept, you know, of aligning toward the future has been disrupted, and people are now trying to align toward the next present, you know, the near future, and work in that way. So it's really disrupting all of our lives in terms of how we do our work, and you know, I mean, I totally agree with you, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. So Boris, going back to your article, because that's what got this all going, this idea about self-motivation and some of these other things that you're laying out here, I just wanted to remind you, or everybody for that matter, about the 4 root causes of struggle and failure. So we've probably been on calls where we talk about this. It comes mostly, we talk about it in pride-based leadership. But when I think about all these different issues we've been talking about the call so far, I wonder if what the 4 root causes describes is holding true. So the 4 root causes of struggle and failure, who on the call wants to step into the gifted students program and tell us what the four uns are? So why would I struggle and fail? Because I am unaware of something that if I was aware of it, might change my perspective, my understanding, and ultimately impact my behavior. What else? Unwilling. So I might have all of the awareness and all of the other thing where someone's going to share, but even with all the resources necessary to do it, I still might not just feel like doing it. It's another one. Unaware, unwilling.
Unable.
I don't have. In part, it's about knowledge, skill, experience, all those things that go into our definition of ability on the change grid. But ability is also affected by the availability of resources. So if in order for me to do whatever, I need a certain budget, or I need a certain time frame, or I need a certain staffing level or whatever, and those things aren't available to me, I may very well say the root cause of my struggle and failure is that I am unable to do it. Yeah, so, but we can make a debate about does that really reflect your ability to do that, or does it really reflect your? Someone came up with once before, they said, if you don't have anything, it's not that you're not able. I'll remember it in just a second, but basically it's just like it can't happen. It's just prevented at even at the starting date. But what's the last one? Unaware, unable, unwilling, and this goes back to what I was talking about, Brian. This is, rather, Boris, this is what I want you to find a diplomatic way to insert into your article. It has to do with suitability. You may very well be unsuitable. for the task at hand. So right now, when I think about the Great Resignation, are we saying that these people aren't aware? No, they're fully aware. They're probably more aware now than they were before. Able, as far as ability goes, they know what they've got and all those sorts of things. And we all know that right now it is very much a job seekers market. And so if they wanted a job, they can go out there and find one, and they can probably find a pretty good one and even get a sign-on bonus or whatever else is being thrown at people in the name of perks these days. They probably left wherever they were because they were unwilling to put up with whatever that organization was offering. And it might very well be the root cause of that issue was that the people in the management and leadership and even ownership, if we're talking about small businesses, were simply unsuitable for the task of leading people to be engaged, to be motivated, etc. So, yep.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is in the work that we do in the D&I space, we talk, as Boris is alluding to here in his article, around the value of paying attention to the environment. So it's not so much about skill set in as much as it's about the employee's experience in the environment. And we have enough data out there to show us that the contribution of talent is very much tied to the employee experience. And so trying to get leaders to understand, no, it's not so much about whether or not the person is capable, but let's pay attention to the experience that they're having in the environment. And so when we talk about the principle of an inclusive environment, those are the things we talk about. There was an organization some years ago, about 20 years ago, that created a model called the tolerance scale. And we run leaders through that scale from 1 to 5, 1 being that the employee feels repulsed, 2 is I'm feeling avoided, and 3 is tolerated. And one of the things we ask leaders is, do you believe that people can they discern whether or not they're simply being tolerated in an environment? And when we have that conversation, it's interesting when you have leaders say, well, listen, I don't discriminate against folks. I'm not wired that way. I wasn't raised that way. And as long as someone comes in and does what the company pays them to do, I can tolerate anyone. And so we get into a discussion about, is that really valuable for someone to feel that they're simply being tolerated versus level 4 and 5, which is acceptance and appreciation. And so one of the questions I ask leaders is, well, let's test that out then. When you get done here today and you go back to your office, you have a discovery about halfway through. And that is, you discover that your employees tolerate your leadership. Does that ring the same way you're presenting it here today? And so I think Boris is spot on when he talks about looking at the environment, but I think it's very much about the employee experience and not so much about the skill set.
Very good. Yeah, because think about how often we've seen people performing a particular job in a particular company and struggling, getting frustrated. By the way, one of the things we say about change is that a great many changes people make in their life are preceded by the word enough. And so they reach this point of no return where they go like, I have put up with this long enough or enough already. So a great many changes are preceded by the word enough. Anyway, we see this person who is struggling, unmotivated, disengaged, etc., in the environment of company A. They go and get a job at company B. It's the exact same job, the exact same task, but because the environment is so different, they are able to thrive there. So I think that speaks very highly to what you've just shared about the environmental role in someone's success. And so the question now goes, well, if the environment is holding me back, is that a reflection on me being unaware, unable, unwilling, or unsuitable? And I think it's pointing to which one. Anyone want to throw out? What do you think?
Unsuitable.
Unsuitable.
Well, I think that the match between me and the company is an unsuitable match,
Right.
but immediately leading up to that realization,
Unwilling.
I'm unwilling to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of you have ever worked for a company where you said, I resent the fact that my hard work is putting a bonus into someone else's pocket that I consider to be worthless? Anybody? Where you go like in a sales organization, the sales manager is doing nothing whatsoever, but you know that every time you make a sale, they're going to get a bit of a commission or a bonus or whatever the case may be. It's like, I hate that feeling of putting money in. Yeah.
So T, I wonder from a suitability standpoint, you're trying to assess suitability of a candidate, let's say, to the organizational structure. And I find that most of these companies are doing this ass backwards. This is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Because what they're doing is they're filtering based on quantity, not quality. They're using applicant tracking systems to sift through candidates to determine who they're going to interview without trying to really pay attention to the details of a resume, maybe. They get them into initial interviews that absolutely focus on past performance and nothing to do with what does this individual really want.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and so how do you assess suitability if you're not even articulating what does the environment in your company look like? And does this person align with it? Does this person even care to be a part of this company?
That's right. There are many dimensions to suitability. Some of them do have to do with people's background, education, experience, or whatever, because we have to know that what they have in their quiver is actually suitable for the task that needs to be done. But beyond that, and more importantly, is what you're pointing to. Is there a suitable match between that individual and the team they'll be on, the environment they're part of, will be working within, whatever it is? So suitability has a lot of questions around it. Because you're talking about the way people hire, I just wanted to throw one more thing out, and we're coming up to the top of the hour, but here's an even bigger issue, I think, when it comes to the giant mistakes that are being made every day when it comes to hiring. And that is that companies have a tendency to favor the candidate who reports a high level of ability to perform the duties and a low level of challenge. We favor the candidate who says, I can absolutely do that. I have a proven track record. It's not difficult at all. I've been doing it for so long. I'm so great at it. So what did that company just hire into their own organization?
A lot of apathetic.
They hired someone who's already down in apathy. So how long do you think that person, even though they're going to say, oh, I'm great, I'm engaged, I'm all on board, how long do you think it's going to be before they yet again slip back down into apathy? So it's just so strange. It's like, and going back to my first mention about suitability, it's like, is this leader even a suitable leader for the organization? If they can't keep people engaged and motivated, then what good are they? Really, what are they leading? So
a lot of it is just quickly comment. A lot of it has to do with selection practices that place leaders in an impossible position to then continuously having to move people up the scale, upgrade towards because they've used selection processes that really are not suitable for where they want to be as an organization. And so, I mean, and I'm not saying that leaders shouldn't learn, but they can't see that. They don't see it. They don't understand why their selection system keeps failing them and why it's so frustrating to lead.
Exactly. Yeah, and then we don't train them, and they don't want to go to training classes, even if we offer them. I'm even deal with that. A leader cannot ever display any evidence that they are lacking in anything, and so they can't come to a training class. It's so backwards. Okay, anyway, that's pretty much our time for today. So Boris, did we just screw your article up completely?
No, absolutely. I think this is great feedback, and I appreciate everybody's openness to give me that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's well on its track for the thing, but I think you want to ultimately come to the conclusion I like this idea. You need fuel to sustain the fire, and that fuel is definitely tension management, but just put a heavier expectation on management and leadership to know what's going on. By the way, I don't know how many of you guys know that, but the phrase tension management, those two words together, is a federally registered trademark that we own. So you could actually put an R in a circle next to it. And we've owned that trademark for, I don't know, Linda, what do you think, 10 years plus? So, yeah, so feel free if you want to like pizzazz it up a little bit. They need to know about tension management, and that's a registered trademark.
Awesome.
And also productive tension.
Oh, right.
Master stream, change works, change grid.
Oracle of the self, all these are registered trademarks.
Oh, I'm gonna use that.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. We paid for it. You might as well use it. So,
That makes me look important.
well, at least it lets people know that it's something. It's not just two
Right,
words
right. It's not
plopped
just
on the
another
paper. That
trend.
we want them to know tension management is a thing.
Right.
And so, yeah. Otherwise, I'll tell you right now, Boris, this is more for you than anyone else. If you just talk about tension management, they're going to think you mean stress management. And they're going to instantly think, well, you just need to take a vacation or have some aspirin or whatever. They don't realize that stress is certainly a big issue in organizations. But as big of an issue as stress can be, it is dwarfed by apathy management. But apathy doesn't draw any attention to itself. So apathy doesn't notice. So it's the quiet killer of productivity. So these people are all under the radar because they know that management and leadership in their ineptness is always going to pay attention to where they find their tension. And that's the poor performers, the things they're doing that shouldn't be being done anyway. They're so preoccupied with everything upgrid that they just, I don't think they consciously ignore it. They just run out of time and bandwidth for dealing with anything that's downgrid. And as we said at the beginning, natural movement on the change grid is downgrid. So sooner or later, everybody and everything is going to end up downgrid unless you're one of those rare individuals who can manage yourself, or someone is going to help you recognize and deal with whatever your downgrid momentum is all about.
Seems like we can have a whole session on apathy management. It seems that's what organizations hire for. They want people with that high skill.
It's so interesting, Brian. Years and years ago, we decided to put apathy management out there as a topic to sell to our corporate clients, and no one was interested. Isn't that just right there? Isn't that all the evidence that you need to kind of know? So we had to change the title of it, and then they bought it. So,
what did you call the title, the new title?
Increasing productivity among your team members, something as generic as that they bought. And once they were sitting in the audience, well, then we could talk about apathy management and all that sort of thing. And then they got it. But as far as just putting it out there, apathy management, it'd be a great topic to discuss, but I would discourage you guys from trying to promote it with that as its label.
Yeah, so you had to use the Trojan horse effect.
I mean, you just do, because people
that may be inappropriate for what's going on right now.
Yeah, times have changed. Maybe they're ready for apathy management. They would just need to have a good subtitle and a couple of lines of description.
Or maybe you just need to call it motivating the unmotivated.
Motivating the unmotivated. That's good. Ellen, you can use that one. That's great. Okay, all right. We're at the top of the hour. So we'll talk to everybody on Thursday. We'll be returning to our focus on positivity. And I want you guys to be giving a lot of thought to when does positivity become toxic? That's going to be a very important part of our discussion. So, okay, thanks everybody. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.